So Fadel, with your experience in the industry, when you look at the last decade, what has most dramatically changed?
That's a very interesting point to raise, because I remember when we always looked at strategies, every 5 years you would run and do your own strategies. And the first thing we used to look at, is there an alternative to what we do today, i.e. the fuel? And that usually took about half an hour. No, there's no alternative. Move on, develop your strategy by selling and putting some shops and doing things. But over the last, I would say 7 years, 8 years, the emergence of electromobility, and I think that's where really the word existential threat comes to you. Because if you look at the European Union and the Western world, and particularly all the world is where decarbonization became really one of the major forefronts in the world. I mean, we all want a better environment for our people, for our children, for our generations to come. So that was one of the main changes that came in, which in a way, at the beginning it was worrying, because the world is going to collapse. But then when you sit back and try to consume what you actually be going through, it actually brings a lot of things to view as a human being, because we have the phenomenal will to survive and actually do better. So that was one really issue, this is existential threat in terms of decarbonization. What it took 100 years to carbonize the world, but it's not going to take 100 years to decarbonize, it'll be short. So it's a very interesting trajectory we're on. The second one is digitization. And the world is getting digital as we move. So that's a big challenge, because it requires a lot of talent, a lot of development, and a lot of cost involved in digitalization. But the digitalization for me, it can be confusing to a lot of people. To me, it's another way of forming a relationship with my customer and solving some problems with them. And it's all about my relationship with my customer. And digitization, I'm using that, not just as a solution to help me administratively, but how can I create new, but without spoiling them or boring them with digitization. You got to be careful how to do that, because you have your iPhone, you've got 700 apps on it. I've used one or two, so you got to be careful with that. And I think the other shift that really very interesting, and you see it everywhere in the industry, is mobility. We used to call it aging, as Europe would call it, but I call it mobility, because particularly, the way we look at it really has dramatically changed, especially the pandemic. In an ironic way, the pandemic has taught us more lessons than about us as humans, but about the business. So the mobility was a big thing, where you're talking about, they're more mindful about travel, they're more mindful about sharing. It's a very much a shared economy. So the mobility is changing, how people shifting their mobility. So it's very interesting to say, well, okay, we are in the mobility business.
Yeah.
So
you mentioned a few, let's say, challenges for the future.
Yeah.
So in fact, there's the whole energy transition that started a few years ago, electric mobility, the digitization, being closer to the customer. Are these for you also the challenges for the future, and how do you turn them into opportunities for your company, these challenges?
It's a very interesting point to say, well, how do you start first to look at these things? That was an important factor. And we did actually started working with you 5 years ago. When I first came to Northwest Europe in 2017, the company was already engaged with you. But we didn't want a consultant, but we wanted somebody we can hold hands together and say, listen, we need to go forward together. I think the acceleration of what I just said is going to go faster and faster as we go forward. And that's why you have to become a bit more agile and more fast. And you're not a big vessel moving the sea anymore, slow moving. That's how we've always been. Now we're being split into small speedboats on different fronts. And all of a sudden we're taking our staff who are used to a big boat to say, put them on a speedboat and you're going to go very fast. So that's going to be, the directionally we know what it is, but the speed is going to be very interesting. Okay. And are we going to be ready for that speed? And that's what we're trying to achieve over the next 5 years.
Okay, great. So when you look at innovation, and because innovation is getting you from that A point to that B point, how do you describe, how do you define innovation in the context of your company, of Q8?
Innovation, I struggled with the word at the beginning, personally, when I joined, because the word is innovation. It's always there, innovation. okay? But the technology has actually given it speed and a faster tone to it. But the challenge is, how do you get your people to think from an innovative point of view, which includes making mistakes? And we do have a culture of, I want to be perfect. So how do you break that culture to say, don't be perfect, be consistent, but allow innovation a room to get in? Because if you think of perfection, innovation has no room for me.
Yeah.
So innovation was very much to say, well, okay, how do I train my people to say, it's okay to fail, it's okay to make mistakes. Particularly in innovation, when you're doing innovative things new. On the existing business, I don't tolerate mistakes because I've been doing this for 40 years. And you need to continue your business because that's funding the future. But when you start innovation, mistakes will happen. But the way I actually said to the people, it's okay to fail, but I will judge you on how hard you try, even if you haven't reached the objective, because that's where innovation comes in. And you gotta be patient with it, and you gotta tolerate mistakes. Usually on existing business, you can't tolerate. So how to have those two trains running together is a very interesting dynamic, and I love it because you've got to be engaging with your people to actually allow that to happen. You can't just sit in an office and just say, you know, here's a train for innovation, jump on it or no. So there's a lot of massaging, if you want to call, and a lot of hard work. So leadership becomes very important in delivering the innovation. And that so far has been able to say, innovation is not a new buzzword. We've always been innovative, but now we're actually asking them to be innovative in what they do at the office, which is very interesting.
Well, very interesting when we talked before, now specifically during the pandemic, you say, I need to engage these people in that transformation, in innovation. They better ask for forgiveness than for permission, let's say. But how did you do that during COVID? That was a difficult period where everyone was apart from each other and working digitally towards. So how did you try to initiate or to keep that innovation spirit alive?
I read a book by the CEO of Microsoft. And he said, my title is CEO, but C doesn't stand for chief. It stands for the culture executive officer. And it really grabbed me, that point. And yes, I have a lot of decisions and metrics to meet and all that stuff, but what was really my role is very important in that area. So pre-pandemic, we worked heavily on the culture, i.e. accountability, collaboration, and experimenting. Allowing people to experiment, it gives you a bit of freedom. And I always used to tell people, the more responsibility you have, the freer you are. The less responsibility, the more constrained you are. So we tried to open the cycle of freedom for them. But I had to lead it from the front and engage even on the lowest level of organization to give them the confidence that it's okay.
That
they could do that and actually reinvent themselves. Because like we're reinventing the business, you need to reinvent the people working at it. And it had to start with me and my leadership team. And then it flows down the organization. So when COVID happened, and for 2 years working remotely, coming into the office, coming out of the office, not seeing people and all that stuff, it started to move transactional, the relationship, which is really worrying to me. But this, to me, the biggest success why we succeeded in COVID, because we're an essential business. We had to be open 24/7. And the only reason I believe, and my directors and my leadership team believes, the only reason we survived those 2 years because of the amount of work we did on the culture.
Now, let's go back to the challenges and to the future. And Q8 really started that transformation towards a mobility player. And what I guess that other executives from other companies that are in the same kind of uncertainty and facing that uncertainty, and they know that something needs to change, when and why did you decide together with the company to start that transition? That was the need to change, the urgency. When did you switch it to action?
There was a really, really profound moment for me. Why? Because when we were sitting around the table with the leadership team discussing electromobility and all that stuff, remember, we come from a national oil company mentality. To change, sometimes it's hard for people. But I made sure to say, well, why do I want to do this? And the answer came back to me very simply, our staff demands it. And I'm like, what do you mean? He said, our staff are the ones who want to see sustainability, they want to see electromobility. And that was a really profound moment for me to say, ooh, that's very interesting. Because what we forgot, I always say something very interesting, your customer spends 2 minutes a week with you. The staff is 9 hours a day with you for 5 days a week. So your customer experience is equal to your employee experience. So we focused a lot on that. I said, well, if I'm going to go into transformation, I need my employee experience along the way, because then I can deliver on my customer experience. And that profound moment when somebody said, your staff demanding it, that really triggered it for me.
Yeah.
And that means you're listening, your ears on the ground. And that's really where, if I have to pin it down, it's that moment that changed my perception. I say, you know what, this is interesting, we need to go forward.
Now, you said in the beginning, I want QA to be a legacy. Do you think you got the company on the right track on this?
You're right about legacy, because people say, I want to build empires. Empires rise and fall. Legacies remain forever. And we wanted to make sure people are going to be part of that legacy of what we're changing, that we've been able to transition our company to transform it into a sustainable mobility player. It's a big ask. It's a big ask. But I need everybody along. And what we've done with our existing business, as we call it, the 2.0, existing business 2.0, to be actually more at the front, customer centricity. Because at the point we used to, people come in, fill up, pay, and go. That's the level of relationship that I had. But that's not good enough, because the customer is much more sophisticated, they're much more informed, and they have a lot of choices. So how do I become a kind of their sustainable mobility player? They see me as a multiplayer rather than just providing certain services. We needed everybody to start the transformation part of the business. But I am really to believe today the development we've done with our people through the Tomorrow Lab initial work that we've done together, where we set everybody in to say, well, okay, there's a legacy in the company right now to say we want to be sustainable, which is amazing for an oil company to say, I want to be sustainable, mobility player, and not just provide fuel. I will provide services like parking apps, innovative apps, and we created an innovation team just to look at the innovation and allow them to experiment. Equally, the electromobility, which are kind of your devil incarnated for oil companies, but we've embraced that. Today, for example, the legacy is that QA Petroleum offer 150,000 electric points across Europe for our customers to use. So the legacy we leave in that we're ready to embrace that threat. We were the first company ever, I think, in the oil industry to offer electric cars 4 years ago to our employees. And it wasn't reason, the employee demanded it. So if you can't do that to your employee, how can you offer it to your customer? Yeah, so we start with who we are, and then automatically filters out to everybody. So the legacy of being sustainable mobility player is being built today. And actually we won, which is a very proud moment, the best fuel or oil company in Belgium by the customer. Voted us based on sentimental values rather than about the monetary value. And we just needed to build that on. And that's, I think, the legacy is now we're established in the community, so we've set the bar high, and there's only one way to go, higher. Because otherwise, as you get higher, you can't. You gotta continue that legacy of pushing forward. And our employees are to be critical in terms of developing that forward.
Yeah. It's nice that you mentioned the triangle between the organization, the market, the employees that are really boosting that innovation, and then your customers who voted you the best company related to that. Now, when you look at the transformation itself, it needs leadership. I remember we had scenarios about what could happen to the company and to the organization, to the society in the next coming 5 to 10 years. There were plenty of uncertainties and many scenarios, and you have to pick out a focus. You really have to put the energy in a specific transformation path. How did you approach that together with your team?
That was I think the beginning of building that legacy. When we were engaged with your team, what we did to say, well, I don't want it to sound a cliche to it all, but there's the top-down approach and the bottom-up approach, particularly from strategy development. Mm-hmm. Yes, the corporate said, that's your strategy, go deliver it, but how do you translate that for the people on the lowest level to the highest level organization? How do you translate that to get them on board? So, and I think what we did is we invited and set up a group of teams from across the organization, from different levels, and we kept the directors out of it, the leadership out of it, and we said to the employees, this is your journey. What do you want us to go for? And I remember majority of your team was working with people from different levels of the organization. Mm-hmm. So we got the buy-in. Yeah. And we got people to say, well, this is exciting, because we made it exciting for them. What do you want? We were going to help deliver this for you. And I think it was so tough at the beginning to get people to innovate and look at it this way. But the more you kept pushing and pushing and pushing, and the more you started to show them a path, they started to rise to the challenge. And they started to put demands on management. That's what we'd like to see. That's what we'd like to see. And I'd rather have that demand than anywhere else, because it's my own people. Because if I lead by example, they will follow. But eventually, what we had to create a concept, because words are lovely, but you need to create a concept for them and for the new generation that's coming in, because it's not a static; it's a completely it's a machine. The dynamism of it, it's very fluid. So we had to create a concept, and we created something called the wave, the next wave, the decarbonization, the new mobility, the electric vehicles. It's like waves and waves of coming at you. So it's how do we ride these waves? So we've looked at 5 pillars. We've defined them and we keep them. And we actually, COVID was a great time to stress test that. The first one was always our existing business 2.0, because that machine, the reliability, you've got to keep cranking the wheel. Yeah. But you don't do it manually anymore. It's electric. You've got to keep cracking the wheel to provide the funds to allow you to plan for the future. Because if you're not doing well in your existing business, the shareholder will be chasing you on cost cutting and exercise. So we had to be very mindful of what we have to actually really set us for the future. In a sense, buying a bit of time to go into that transition. The second one was what we did is electromobility. We knew the threat is there. Yeah. You can just sit back and watch it happen in front of your eyes, or you can actually embrace it. And we've really embraced it. I mean, in 5 years, I did not talk to a single oil company. Majority of my discussions have been with innovation teams, electromobility companies, startups, and different companies that never existed before, which was an amazing way, because you see the energy, the entrepreneurship is coming in. So we embrace ourselves entrepreneurship. The second one is just the mobility, as we discussed the mobility earlier, is how do we become part of the mobility for the consumer and our staff. If I give them electric bikes, it's part of the mobility solutions. Don't drive, take your bicycle. We will work with you on that basis. And one important factor was also is how do we engage and enable our people, which is the fundamental of all that we're doing it today. And that is the hardest part for me, because it's taxing and you do a lot of work in it. And if you don't believe in the transformation, you could never engage and enable your employees. Yeah. I don't want to call it HR anymore. Some people call it human remains, but I like to call it engage and enable our employees. And that's where a lot of the efforts are going. Communication is really important. It's funny, when you communicate, a lot of people will say, you don't communicate enough. COVID came, we upped our communication, and then people said, you're communicating too much. So trying to find the balance is very difficult. But we had set these 5 pillars that till today, since we started working together, have actually been stress tested, and they are still valid, and we are still, so it pleases me what we did 5 years ago is still valid to take us for the next 5 years.
When you talk about and when you look at the organization itself, the transition that you make, you look to your successor, what kind of advice would you give to your successor looking at the organization that you built in the last 5 years?
Listen to your people. And I mean really listen
That's
to
really
your,
number one.
listen to your, and I'm not talking about your directors or your leadership team, listen to the people. Because those people have more ideas than you can imagine, but sometimes they get lost in translation or lost in the chain. But that means you have to go down. People say you're hands-on. I'm feet-on. I walk a lot to talk to people and see what they are. And listen, I've learned a lot from my people than I learned from my directors. Listen to them. The world is transforming whether we like it or not.
Mm-hmm.
How to continue that transformation? It's the people who put me on that path. Whoever comes in next, it's the people who are going to put you on the next path.
Yeah.
So don't be less corporate, I would say, and more connected to your people.
Yeah. As a final question, many of the companies we work with, many of the executives, they look at innovation it's a river that is constantly flowing. And there are a lot of booby traps. There are a lot of things that can go wrong. What kind of advice would you give them to be careful about specific topics? Why innovation could fail in an organization? You mentioned already some of them, but maybe there's also some advice that you could give. Watch out for this.
I don't know if I can say this without getting in trouble with the corporate people. This is my problem. The market, your customer, your employees will push you for innovation. Corporate will pull you back. Try to find the right balance between the two.
Yeah.
Because corporate environments are very behind the desk, big ticket, big things. But reality is not that. So whoever's going to come in next, so what they need to do, be less corporate and more within your community.
And I think this also is valid for not only large corporates, but maybe also for family organizations or smaller organizations. You always have a kind of shareholder that
Yes.
puts the money into the organization, and you have, as I understood, the question, the really shouting from the market to be innovative and keep that balance.
You've got to listen to that customer, that end user, but more importantly, listen to your employee. They spend more time with you. You spend more time with them than your family.
Yeah.
So they're your family. And we gotta be careful of the word family, because families, to me, is between your brothers and sisters, all working together to achieve different objectives.
Yeah.
Organizations, we all gotta work together to achieve one objective or two objectives, the same one. So yes, the feeling is a family, but you gotta be careful how you frame it, because everybody says, oh, we're a family. That's great from an emotional point of view, that we're there for each other, we look after each other, we take care of each other, we're happy together and we sat together. But in terms of objectives organization, we're still an organization that has objectives to achieve. Yes, we wanna be as a family, but we gotta work towards a single objective, which is organizational. So finding that balance, not to be stuck to the fact that we're a family, but we all have to have the same objectives going forward. And getting that is very important. That's why you need a lot of communication, a lot of hands-on, a lot of feet on, and get a buy-in from everybody. And particularly getting your shareholder to believe in what you're doing. If your shareholder believes what you're doing, the support will be phenomenal to take you forward. So that's the things that I really, finding that balance. Yes, we're a family, but we have the same objective.